There are few things I love in this life as dearly as a game with multiple endings that are so totally different they may as well be in different games. Being able to help the world with your new witch god wife, or otherwise doom the world next to a guy literally called Dung Eater in Elden Ring? Sick. Being able to solve an impossible mystery, make a new best friend and discover an unimaginable unheard of species? Or otherwise die by uncomfy chair or ceiling fan in the first 5 minutes of Disco Elysium? Also sick, if entirely heartbreaking in that second example. As such, the discovery that Look Outside, a game that became one of my absolute favourites in an almost troublingly short amount of time, between I adopt an adorable tooth child and rat son, and my neighbour has gained 100 eyes and won't share, has a whole boatload of different endings with varying levels of mess-upness, was like a child learning that this year they're going to get 12 Christmases instead of just the one. This is not just because Look Outside is an absolute treat, wrapped in an assortment of what appears to be probably human skin, but also because it has 12 official endings, and a few saucy deaths that are essentially unofficially endings in their own right. Having now played all of those endings, and enjoyed every last twisted moment of them, one question naturally came up. Which of these endings is the most twisted? Armed with a dangerous sense of curiosity that has doomed many horror protagonists to a fate worse than death, and is directly responsible for one of the most brutal endings in Look Outside, I've answered this question by ranking each of these endings by how terrible it would be to experience them in the flesh, versus just on a computer screen. So, while Look Outside does get pretty messed up even in its cheerier endings, there are what I would call good endings in the game. And good in the sense that they at least outwardly seem to end with the majority of characters and life on Earth being able to move on with things, and have a reasonably good life. Even if said life involves them now being a sentient vending machine, because you can't win them all. Your mileage may vary on exactly how giddily cheerful these endings are, because at the end of the day, it's a game set in a nightmarish Lovecraftian post-apocalypse, wherein the characters are only just learning an apocalypse of sorts just happened to them. And no amount of charming winged old ladies offering you soup or adorable rat sons can make you fully forget that, even if I would surely die for my edgy baseball cap wearing rodent child Sammy. However, at least in the Promise ending, the post-apocalypse is looking anything but grimdark, and becomes borderline chipper. In this finale, you're able to leverage learning that Sybil is alive, and the vow you make her to look after Jasper, to convince the astronomers, who have combined into an old-school Bible angel-looking monster form, to use the power of friendship, or rather, whatever relationship Jasper and Sybil had, since it's intentionally left a little ambiguous as to whether they were just friends or not, allowing them to regain their sanity when they go to chat to the visitor. Upon returning, the Exalted Four are able to bring about a new era for humanity that, I'll be honest, seems pretty sick. Okay, so maybe living in this reality means you got transformed into some sort of messed up, fleshy caterpillar or admittedly badass limb stealer thing, but it does seem like you get to live a pretty nice life after that, so long as you still have the sense of self and sanity left to do so. It also helps that this is, to my knowledge, currently the only ending where you also get an update on what each member of your party decides to do after the events of the game, which is rewarding enough by itself, but is extra heartwarming for these sweet descriptions of how many characters stay in touch with Sam, and since you get to see how doing specific character side quests change the lives of some of these figures for the best. Short of literally showing everyone skipping into the sunset, I'm not sure how this could get more cheerful, given the context of everything that comes before. I'm going to preface putting the denial ending here with the caveat that I know there's a lot of discussion about whether its depiction of events is actually true, since there's a very popular, and pretty interesting, theory that what you're seeing is the main character Sam lying to himself about what's happening. If this theory were to hold true, denial would be the exact opposite of a cheerful or good ending, since it would mean denial is just a funky version of the alternate truth ending, where you turn into 1,000,000 yards of frubes and strangle the world to death with 1,000,000 of your sentient slinky limbs thanks to your broken mind. That said, much like Sam in this theory, I refuse to believe this, as my personal take is it makes sense for the denial ending to reward you for choosing not to see the visitor's true and full form by allowing him to keep just enough brain cells via letting Sam remember that he has a full Addams family of his own waiting for him at home, and actively working to help build a better world. I think this works better with the themes and story of Look Outside too, since the Visitor not being an intentionally malicious entity, unless you try and 1v1 them, means that it also makes sense for Sam to be able to help humanity just as much as he's capable of hindering it. If the denial ending is to be taken as legit, it also seems like a twistedly jolly sort of place to be, as the shots of one of Sam's digits acting as an ambassador and celebrity, and the free real estate built on one of his tubes, seems to suggest a pretty cool world ends up unfolding after all the turmoil, hand people, and confrontations with God we've had to tackle to get up to this point. Sam infinitely growing may also solve the housing crisis, so, I can't say there isn't some appeal. And, of course, you can't talk about Look Outside's happy endings without talking about the true final ending, wherein the game is essentially possessed by a JRPG in the final fight. If Sam spent many, many, many hours completing an extensive and infamous in-game video game, seemingly rewriting reality to be this video game world, which is restored to peace and contentment after you beat the Visitor, in a bit of a fun, playful parody ending, akin to the goofy Silent Hill endings wherein aliens or dogs can be behind everything. It is pretty cheerful, though even this has some pretty troubling implications in terms of replacing reality and all the characters we knew. And since you can subject fluffy rabbit creature Rabu to thousands of years of suffering if you use his Torment Beam ability in the fight, though in all honesty I've never quite had the heart to, since look at how happy he is to never have used it here, and we all suffer plenty in the other endings without adding in anything extra. And now we begin to delve into the horrors of it all. Okay, so the Category C endings are for Look Outside endings, wherein things get very, very bad, at least partially. Usually for our plucky, but also perennially unlucky protagonist, who comes a cropper in a variety of ways in some of the endings here. And in some of the death sequences I'm also going to factor into this category, because I'm a completionist like that. Actual ending-wise, the No Going Back ending, and maybe even the Mask ending fall under this category. They're not especially glowing finales to get, as the No Going Back ending is simply the ending you get if you wait out the 15 days you're told the outside world is cursed for, instead of getting any other ending. And the Mask ending ends up revealing that the shadow we've encountered on our journeys, and maybe even gained as a flatmate, if you've been especially nice, is a weird, time loop warped version of Sam, which you can only learn through dooming your astronomer friends and getting your own Sam trapped in the exact same time loop. While neither are particularly pleasant endings to consider the full implications of, doubly so for the Mask ending, since you low-key kill two Sams with one stone in this one by going on to destroy another version of yourself time warp style. They're only really, really bad for the main characters we meet in-game, which means your average Joe is probably still doing okay-ish, all things considered, even if they may have been reshaped into some sort of Lovecraftian giraffe because they tried to pop outside to get some milk. I would also say that the majority of special death sequences you can get throughout the game come under this category, which include delights like doing the titular act of looking outside, being turned into a worm creature, being turned into something implied to be much more Frankenstein-esque and somehow worse than a creepy worm creature, being murked by a staring competition, and having your soul taken to hell in what may still not be the world's most expensive car insurance, just to name a few of these fates. Or being placed in permanent agony by the creepy little hands of the shadow, or ignoring all of the various red flags Spine has to get your aorta reconfigured like gum in the hot sun, are not exactly things that are under most people's category of a fun time, though if you're listening and think it'd be a jolly Thursday for you, please know I respect and fear you. They are endings that are only really bad for the player character. This means unless you're Sam, or one of the unfortunate party members who have to look on and possibly get their own fate sealed in the single worst third-wheeling experience ever, these scenarios are sort of just another Tuesday, even if they're significantly worse than the best endings, since the world doesn't get a jolly and helpful supernatural protector who can also serve as thousands of miles of new land for you all to live on. I should note from the offset here that I'm still torn over whether the flawed ritual, wherein you flub part of the ritual to commune with the visitor, and become a seemingly constantly expanding assortment of googly eyes, and the failed ritual, wherein you totally screw up the ritual in a completely fundamental way, intentional or otherwise, are fully B category endings, as it really depends on what exactly you think happens in the ending, and what it means for the game's world after the events we actually witness. In both endings, we're shown that Sam goes through a deeply troubling Cthulhu puberty, and the ways we're shown this particular event suggest that Sam's punishment for essentially pranking an elder god is an exponential growth that, like some of the other forms Sam takes, may be cursed to simply never stop expanding. If this is the case, then these two endings are pretty bleak, as the one consistent thing we're shown throughout Look Outside is that any creature whose transformation has them continually grow tends to be continually bad for the increasing amount of the population who end up having to come into contact with them. If that isn't what happens, though, it's still pretty breezy for everyone who isn't in Sam's immediate freakout space. What I'm going to affectionately call the Fungus Ant Darkroom deaths certainly fall into B-grade territory, though, as both carry the distinct implication that you're about to become public enemy number one to every living being you come into contact with. For the fungal deaths at the hand of the Spore Mother, who is cosplaying as a beautiful princess and who can trick you into being chomped and made into part of her fungal colony, this comes from the concept that your party's strength is likely then given to this force, who at absolute best will level up themselves a fair few times from taking your squad down, and at worst are here provided enough power-wise to take over the apartment complex, and maybe even beyond. For the Darkroom death, things are even less vague, and even more disturbing, as it's explicitly stated that you combine with an image of the visitor due to the mind and body warping effects of gazing upon even a picture of it, and are then compelled to make more copies of this image to show others, which is sure to doom who knows how many other characters, given just how many different ways seeing the visitor's form can mess people up in-game. That said, these fates do effectively seem like an easy breezy walk in the park compared to the next category of Look Outside's endings, which probably says a lot, really. We've got a whole heaping portion of endings to discuss here that come into the A-tier endings horror-wise, as an assortment of ways to end the game close with some truly horrifying and truly unique scenarios, which manage to be only a hair's breadth away from being the bleakest ending possible. Perhaps the easiest example of how intense this means these endings are still is that the least intense ending explicitly involves the death of 90% of the population of Earth in half a month, with the astronomers having laser-beamed millions of people, who are hoping against all evidence to the contrary that maybe the Exalted Four are an angel that will teleport them to a better place, rather than a messed-up, sentient slinky made out of 4 nerds who is locked in a seemingly permanent mental breakdown. For Category A, this is ultimately about as cozy as things get. It might seem like the two endings involving the cute guinea pig Cinnamon, who you can steal/adopt early on in the game, might subsequently be cozy endings by lieu of featuring a sweet little critter, and having it survive until the end of the game, since some other endings require you to sacrifice the poor little thing in order to check whether the apartment's security cameras are capturing footage of the visitor or not. However, given Cinnamon is effectively being sacrificed to an elder god, you may be able to add 1 and 1 together to get 2 here, or rather, to realise that Cinnamon being present is going to make things worse. What happens in these endings is a lose-lose setup, as winning or losing the fight against the fever dream-esque mishmash of astronomers and Cinnamon has no good outcome. If you beat this creature, you get the Zin Amon ending, where it's revealed that, lol no, you thought things were over, but you have only temporarily delayed the inevitable. And the inevitable is legitimately awful, as humanity once again faces a threat that they couldn't have possibly seen coming in the form of an ever-expanding sea of monstrous guinea pig eyes and teeth, which feed on the world and amass all of their collective minds into one form, that eventually eats, and I am not being figurative here, the entire planet Earth, leading to one of the most striking images in the entirety of a game absolutely filled to the brim with them. Dying to the entity doesn't go better, either, as both endings show that everyone the Cinnamon ending boss creature eats retain their own consciousness, meaning they're trapped in the flesh of a seemingly immortal creature whose only desire is to devour all around it. And yes, dear book nerds listening at home, that is the plot of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, except kind of worse in some ways, because at least nobody had to deal with that fate in the book while also smelling like unwashed gerbils. As such, while the entire Earth isn't eaten in the Eternal Fate ending, life isn't exactly looking peachy here either, as anyone eaten by Zin Amon has to sit screaming on its skin, painfully aware this is it for them for forever. Despite the Words of Power ending being conceptually entirely different in basically every other way, the fate you and seemingly the rest of the world endure is just as bad. Words of Power is very interesting from a lore perspective, in that it revolves around a character who's otherwise barely linked to the rest of the story, and has nothing to do with any of the ritual stuff that effectively every other ending revolves around. Instead, this ending revolves around crosswords ending the world. It's both less weird than it sounds and more weird than it sounds, as solving the crossword book you can pick up from your friend/stalker Lyle's apartment reveals a code to the secret area that has been holding back Wilhelmina, who's sort of an evil word witch, from wreaking havoc on the world. While you can beat her up and take her stuff instead, you do get the option to submit to her whims and speak the word that frees her, and allows her to make you into a fleshy immortal lump who is then forced to experience what is described as her awful rise to power, which, based on all the context clues we've gotten from Sam's fate here, and the skinned people who warn you not to free her, seems to not exactly be a delicious savoury picnic, to say the least. Finally, the other perfect ritual ending, wherein you choose the truth option and learn exactly what the visitor looks like, cooking your mind like a pumpkin in a pottery kiln, flips the script on the denial ending, having your character's body transform in much the same way, but without you having enough remaining sanity to use your new cryptid form to help others. Instead, you start doing what's perhaps a little more expected of horror monsters than cutting ribbons and providing extra housing with your lumps, and start chowing down on the entirety of humanity, forcing the survivors underground, where they're still set to be hunted out by deep-reaching tentacles, like a plant draws nutrients from soil. In short, much like all the other endings in this category, it's pretty awful for every sentient being on Earth altogether, to the degree that there's only one possible scenario in Look Outside that's worse. And that's what the S category was made for. Those who haven't played Look Outside may now be wondering why the game's S tier section, for the game's Nightmare Fuel endings, only has a single entry. Those who have played this specific ending in the game, or are otherwise aware of it through other means, however, likely already knew exactly what little horror of an ending would end up netting itself the crown, because there could only ever be one. Look Outside's Unity ending is twisted in a way that none of the rest of the conclusions to the game can be, because it cuts right to the heart of the core horror of its story, and draws most obviously from a wide roster of the best and most potent horror stories since prehistoric folk began telling each other spooky stories. Unity sees you fight and kill your neighbour Sybil after she reveals she intentionally wiped her own memory because she discovered something she warns us humanity cannot know for its own safety, since curiosity can kill more than the can if you only believe. Our reward for taking on Sybil in one of the hardest boss fights of the game is access to an otherwise nondescript looking room that contains a final, crucial piece of Sybil's notes, wherein she comes to the harrowing and entirely correct conclusion that the entirety of Earth and humankind is actually a part of the Visitor, and life as we know it has only existed because this unattended to part of the entity has somehow become unaware of this fact. As such, the minute you read this document, you condemn all life to cease existing and instead be reincorporated back into the Visitor. This is made worse by the visuals we're shown regarding this ending, which lovingly detail Sam melting into the floor, since both are made of the same being's flesh, before slowly combining the rest of the apartment, bricks and people alike, into one awful amorphous mass, like the world's biggest and most conceptually troubling blender. While it's technically less violent than a lot of the other fates Sam and humanity can endure, it's so much worse than these demises, because it's not even just like you as a person would cease to exist. It's that every person you ever knew, or ever could have known, ceases to exist. And every animal. And every plant, rock, or living cell even, all revert back to being one entity. Which is made even more messed up by the fact that this entity themselves doesn't even want this to happen, given they gladly disappear back into the void when they realise their presence is negatively affecting humanity, and appear to have developed a soft spot of sorts for Earth and its inhabitants in more than one other ending. All life as we know it loses in the Unity ending, and even the celestial elder god who should theoretically be the big bad of the story ends up once again drifting alone and purposeless through space, which is such a good concept horror-wise, because I'm constantly torn between wanting to think about all the implications as much as possible, and wanting to never think about them again. I think this well and truly earns the Unity ending the sole top spot as the all-time most horrific ending to the game, which ironically also makes it the best in some ways, albeit very twisted ones. If you made it to this point in the video, first and foremost I want to say a big old thanks, because This is such a self-indulgent video and topic that to have made it this far, I think you theoretically have to be either the exact same brand of weirdo I am, or otherwise have the patience of a saint. So either way, you're owed a huge shout out from me. After covering Look Outside for a previous video for this channel, I couldn't resist delving into all the various endings and ways you can finish the game. So this is definitely a bonus round video to some degree. Though I'm seriously close to 100%ing the game now, so there's definitely a hat trick of Look Outside videos minimum set to be on this channel. I hope you have a good morning, afternoon, night, or ambiguous era as of yet unknown to mankind that you find yourself trapped in whenever you watch this. And that looking at how grim things could be for humanity in many worse universes makes you feel at least a little bit at home in this one.